Okay, so here we go. There's no end to questions, of course. There's always new questions until you become an arahant. That's the only time the questions come to an end. So not everyone is an arahant yet. This is the proof of that. So we know that much. Okay, so let us go on. So first of all, dear Ajahn, are you currently utilizing any AI tools to assist with your studies and teachings? Not really. And I think, I don't know, when it comes to it, I guess AI has different usages. And one of the usages is kind of the large language models that are used these days to help with translations and with creating texts and these kind of things. Aha, okay, very good. And I must admit, I have some doubt about these large language models. They just use the creative activity of human beings, and then they kind of regurgitate that in their own way. And in the process, they often make mistakes, and they don't really create anything truly new. It is just kind of using what's already there. And so, I mean, it can perhaps have some uses occasionally if you want to translate some text that no one wants to translate anyway, like some obscure commentary or something like that. It might be handy. But I think generally speaking, I think I don't know. Maybe you can use it as an assistant. Maybe you can use it to help pick up mistakes in your translation. But I think it should not be the main usage in translation of suttas. That does not mean it cannot have other usages. I think it can probably be used in many other areas. But I think, anyway, otherwise my job is gone. Actually, I can focus more on meditation, and if that is true, that's a very good point, isn't it? I can kind of let go of the translation work. But yeah, anyway, so I'm a little bit dubious about it. That's kind of my feeling here. So maybe the next generation can take this up and do something more useful with it. Anyway, Ajahn, I learned from the sutta that the Atanatya's protection, Digha Nikaya 32, was used by the Sangha to ask for the Deva's protection when facing malicious beings like ghosts. Does the Sangha still chant the Atanatya Sutta these days to dispel ghosts and demons? Thank you. If not, what does the Sangha chant? Yes, I know that there are people, there are monks who do chant this protection chant, Digha Nikaya 32. And so it is being chanted, and we don't do it at Bodhinyana Monastery. We don't have any big problems with demons and things, so maybe if we have problems with demons, we may chant this, but we don't really have that issue, so it hasn't really been required. Can it be used for these things? Maybe. I think one of the interesting things, I was recently translating what is known as the Kanda Paritta, and you may know the Kanda Paritta. It is, the one that says that you have metta for all the creepy beings, all the snakes and everything, especially the snakes. It was after a monk was bitten by a snake and he died. And then the Buddha said, well, he didn't have enough metta to the snakes, that's why he died. And so the point in that sutta, it starts off by saying you should have metta for the snakes, and then the Buddha gives a chant to help you generate that metta. So it's not the chant in itself, that is the main thing. The main thing is actually the metta that you generate. And so as always, these chants are they're okay, but that is not the main point. The main point is your conduct, who you are as a person. If you want to be protected, have loving kindness, have compassion, then you will be protected by those things. You find this in the Mettanisangsa Sutta in the Anguttara Nikaya 10s and 11s, the benefits of metta. I think it's 11s actually. And those benefits of metta is that you are protected from all kind of things, from weapons and poisons and all of this kind of stuff. And that also includes, snakes or whatever. And it's kind of fascinating. How does that even work? And according to the way this is traditionally taught, is that there are devas who kind of control various aspects of nature. So you have the weather devas, you have the devas that are kind of related to the snakes. There are maybe the devas that are related to various aspects of the world. There are individually protective devas who may look after you as an individual if you are a good person. And what is fascinating about these ideas that there are individual devas controlling various realms of the world, that this is actually very common around the world. I don't know about Chinese culture, probably the same. Yeah, you have kind of devas and things kind of in charge of certain things. If you go to European culture, the kind of Christian ideas, it's a similar kind of thing about angels. You have different levels of angels. And some of those angels are protective, personal protective angels, and others are protective of certain realms of animals, some protective certain territories like countries or whatever. So it's, the different cultures in the world have similar kind of ideas. And to me, that is indicative of that there is maybe some underlying reality to these things. And sometimes we kind of touch that same underlying reality and we understand it. That's why these different ideas, they pop up at different places around the world. It's like ideas like rebirth as well. There was a very interesting anthropological study of rebirth done by a Sri Lankan man his name was Gananath Obayasekara, and he became a professor at Princeton University in the US. So he was a very successful anthropologist. And he did this anthropological study of ideas of rebirth in various cultures around the world. And he, like the North American Indian culture, not the real Indians, the real Indians are in India, but these are the North American, named after the Indians in India. And then the various Pacific Island cultures, Indonesian cultures. It took a large variety of kind of small cultures around the world and showed how these ideas of rebirth are found in so many different places. And it makes you wonder, why does it pop up in so many different cultures? And I think the answer, sometimes it can be that the ideas are inherited, but then there are some ideas that are not inherited. And why is it that some ideas seem to be everywhere, other ideas are not? And I think the answer is very often that, well, this is an underlying reality. And sometimes we tap into that underlying reality, regardless of where you are in the world. And then these things become knowledge in these places. And so the fact that these things are common knowledge to me is a sign that something deeper is going on. There's some reality here. It's kind of a shame that in much of Western culture these days, they have rejected these ideas of devas. Instead, they have this one God. And in my opinion, they have moved backwards. Yeah, it's kind of very strange. You look at the world, the history of Christianity is this idea of progress, right? In the old days, they had all of these different gods, right? And then every country had their own god and this kind of things. And then they became more sophisticated, started to unify these gods, yeah? And eventually they had only one God left, that was the Christian God. And then that Christian God became more and more distant, more and more kind of hard to understand what it was. And then that kind of became the real. So it's kind of this idea of progress, that we have come to understand. We have a more sophisticated idea of religion. Actually, it is not progress at all. It's going backwards. They have lost, to my mind, they have lost something that actually probably was more real. To me, the idea of one God that created the universe, that to me is fundamentally problematic. But the idea of having kind of devas that protect you and exist in nature, to me that is far more acceptable way of thinking about the world. Why? Because it relates to the world as we observe it. It relates to the world in the sense that these devas are impermanent. They arise, they pass away, just like everything else in the world. One creator God that is always there, there is no such experience. It is not something you can ever know. It's impossible to know something that is permanent. The human mind is not capable of that. So the idea of a creator God is inherently unknowable. It is a figment of the human imagination. It must be. It's the only way this can possibly arise. So we have gone backwards. Next time you come to Perth, tell all the Australians you're going backwards. See what they say. Tell them, I'm a Buddhist. I know what's going on. Yeah, you don't. Be careful. I'm not sure how they will take that. Actually, they probably will agree with you, right? Because these days, not many people are religious anyway, down in Australia and many other places. So Anyway, it's kind of hard to know sometimes. You have to have a very open mind sometimes, because it's very easy to be trapped by the culture you're in, by the society you're in. Very difficult to challenge those ideas that you have grown up with, that you have imbibed since you were a tiny little toddler, and you think that's the truth. And actually, sometimes it is not the truth at all. It's just your conditioning by society around you. Anyway, not sure if I answered your question, but I did say a few things. Yeah, okay. Let's carry on. So the next question, Ajahn, how do you think about the development of mindfulness in society, especially MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction? Thank you. I think it is good. I think it is nice that society uses mindfulness for the benefit of people. Yeah, it is always positive that we use all of these things, all available tools. So I think it is good. And I think that maybe they had a point. The person behind this was a fellow called John Kabat-Zinn, who was he was working at one of these large hospitals in the US, and he started to introduce this idea back in the 1970s, I think, or something like that. And when he did that, he stripped away what he considered the religious stuff. All of these Eightfold Path, back to one factor, mindfulness. That's all I'm going to teach, mindfulness, and everything else is stripped out. And maybe that was necessary to gain acceptance, because Buddhism was still considered very, maybe strange in the West at that time, and maybe still is for some people. So maybe it was required. And so, in one sense, it is good. But in another sense, from a Buddhist point of view, it is very limited. It's the idea of being aware of your emotions, being aware of what's happening to you, and then somehow regulating your conduct based on that sense of awareness. But so it's a very it's a superficial technique for having a better life. That's really what it is about. And it's very limited. And I think they have started to realize that especially in the United States, but around the world, that they need to bring in more of the factors of Buddhism to make it a more complete technique. And so they started to bring in the idea of ethics, understanding that ethics underlies the idea of mindfulness. Mindfulness without ethics is very weak. Mindfulness with ethics, then you're starting to gain some ideas. Then it's starting to work. But of course, from a Buddhist point of view, even that is not quite enough. Because for mindfulness to be really powerful, ethics is important, but also right view. Without right view, you are never really going to be successful. And the reason is because if your reason for doing mindfulness is that you want a better life, what that means is that you put your ordinary life, that is the primary goal. That is what you're trying to succeed. And everything else, like mindfulness, is there to support your ordinary life. So ordinary life is number one. Everything else is there for that purpose. And what that means is that if you have some problem in your life, you're going to think about those things, because that is the most important thing. Mindfulness is just there to support everything else. So when you come to meditation, because your life is the most important thing, you're going to think about that, because that is what, that's what you're here for. So what we need to do is we need to have right view. Right view reverses it. It puts the spiritual path on top, and it puts everything else is under the spiritual path. It is there to support the spiritual path. And once you make the spiritual life the main priority, the main goal, the main purpose, then you're not going to think so much about your ordinary life anymore, because it is subsidiary. It is there to support the spiritual path, not the other way around. And so right view, having the right kind of values, is absolutely fundamental for making this work. When you sit down, you close your eyes, you don't want to think about the world. Who cares about the world anyway? It's irrelevant. That's not where our happiness is to be found. Then you can feel some beautiful peace in your meditation. But these people who don't have that, they're always going to be very limited in their ability to use this in their life. They're never really going to find true peace. And so it is useful, but it's very limited. It has taken away some of the essential ideas of Buddhism, remove that, and then it doesn't really work. And of course, one of those ideas is the idea of rebirth. Yeah, but if you go to the Western world and tell everyone, yeah, you've got to believe in rebirth, they're not going to be all that happy. Yeah, they don't really want to hear that. And so that is becomes part of the problem. So this is one, I think, one of the kind of really important things that we do as Buddhists, is we have to get this idea of rebirth kind of accepted, and understood by people. And then those people who understand that, they will be able to approach Buddhism in a much deeper and more powerful way. And they will be able to go beyond mindfulness-based stress reduction, and go beyond that. That's one part. Another part of it is that many of these alternative ways of teaching the Dhamma, you have the mindfulness-based stress reduction, whatever it is. You have Goenka, maybe. I don't know if Goenka is kind of also a little bit alternative way of thinking about Dhamma. And many of these kind of things are a little bit on the side of the Dhamma. They can be good stepping stones for the Dhamma. So you start with these things and you start to wonder, well, where does it actually come from? It comes from Buddhism. Well, if Buddhism gave this great idea of mindfulness, maybe I should look more into Buddhism. And so you start to look and you start to contemplate and you discover there is some very interesting thing in the Buddhist teachings. Or if you start with a Goenka, Goenka is quite limited. It's almost a pure focus on the Satipatthana Sutta. Then you start with a Goenka, and then you develop from there. And then you go and you read the suttas more broadly, and you get a broader understanding of what the Dhamma really is about. So very often these things can be starting points. Yeah, we all have to start somewhere. I have to admit, when I became a Buddhist monk, I didn't really know what I was doing. It was more like, I thought I had to become a Buddhist monk. It seemed right, so I became a Buddhist monk. I didn't really understand so much. I knew I wanted a spiritual life. I knew I wanted to focus on something more profound, but I didn't really have a proper grasp of the Dhamma. I was quite open-minded, so for me, the idea of rebirth was not very difficult to accept. For me, that seemed kind of natural in many ways. So we all have to start out somewhere, but we should not be afraid of challenging people and bringing up new ideas. We recently, when we had a conference in Singapore quite recently, you were there, Freddie, for the conference, yeah? And so we had a conference and we were talking about rebirth, yeah? And that was a really nice conference, because usually on these large Buddhist conferences, you talk about some boring thing like mindfulness or whatever, yeah? The same old thing, always the same old thing, yeah? But this rebirth really gets the audience going. And so we talked about some profound aspects of rebirth. And I thought it was a really good conference, actually. I really enjoyed it. Did you enjoy it, Freddie? You were there? Yeah? You thought it was good? Okay, great, yeah. So we were there, and Ajahn Brahm was there, I was there, Mingyur Rinpoche, who comes to Singapore, to Hong Kong before, has come, he was there at the conference, and some Mahayana master from Taiwan was there, and it was a really nice gathering, and we discussed these things, and really, really kind of enjoyable. That's the sort of thing we should really talk more about, because these are absolutely fundamentally important for the Buddhist path. All right. Okay, so it was very difficult when I did death contemplation with you, Ajahn, 5 years ago. This time around, it is easier, as I feel I am more ready to die any moment. Progress, I hope, thank you. So that's wonderful, isn't it? That's really cool. So maybe you have matured a little bit. The idea of death has kind of penetrated a little bit. It doesn't seem so dangerous anymore. Maybe because you live your life well, you feel more ready to die. Yeah, a person who lives well is ready to die, basically, much more ready. And sometimes we, like Ajahn Brahm, I think he's ready to die. That's why he doesn't care so much about his diet and his exercise and these kind of things. Yeah, he's ready anytime. He's ready to go. And sometimes you wonder, maybe all the stress, maybe he has a little bit of a death wish. He's kind of had enough of all the stress in the world. Yeah? So that's good. I'm happy to hear that. And it means, yes, it definitely means that you're making progress. And so when I go through this whole sequence of reflecting on death, you don't have to do that every time. Once you get used to the idea of death, all you need to do is to remember I can die at any time. And that whole sequence just happens straight away in your mind. It doesn't even actually happen. You just know it by heart. And so That's all you have to do, is to remember you're going to die. Wow, any time, okay. There was a snake here this morning, right? Yeah? That was a poisonous snake? No? Okay. Oh. He wanted to poison the snake. It's more interesting that way, yeah? So, but anyway, it's a sign. It could have been a poisonous snake. They are around. And it was a small snake, but small snakes can be just as poisonous as the big ones, yeah? There is that nice sutta in the Kosala Samyutta, where the Buddha says to King Pasenadi, he says that there are four young things you should never underestimate, yeah? And there's four things you should never underestimate: a young king, yeah, because a young king is very powerful. You should never underestimate a young fire, because a young fire, it starts small, but before you know it, it consumes you. The third thing is the snake. You should never underestimate a young snake, and still be very poisonous. Sometimes in Australia, I heard about someone being bitten by this tiny snake, and they thought, yeah, it's just a small snake, and within half an hour they were dead, yeah. This happens. And the last one you should never underestimate is a young samana, a young monastic. Yeah, you never know what these young monastics are up to. And so that's kind of interesting, because the Buddha at that time, he was still quite young, and the king kind of challenged him. Yeah, you're young, you're young or whatever. And he says, don't underestimate the young monastics. So that was that story. So it's a sign. Yeah, I take this as a devaduta. When you see a snake here, it's a sign. It's a reminder of death, basically. Take these things as reminders. If you take them as reminders of death, you're using the Dhamma in all possibilities, all situations, to make the path work for you. That is the right way to think about the snake. Then you are heading in the right direction. So, well done. Usually when I know people really well, I can tell from the handwriting who it is who wrote these things. But I don't come to Hong Kong often enough to recognize the handwriting. So maybe if I came every year, it would happen eventually. But some people in Perth, I know exactly who they are. They think they are anonymous, but they are not anonymous at all. They are it's very funny. All right. Okay, next one. Do monks do physical exercise apart from yoga? Yes, please encourage Ajahn Brahm to exercise for his health so we can hear more of his teachings. Yeah, you can try to encourage Ajahn Brahm to exercise. Very, very difficult. Ajahn Brahm has a mind of his own, and that mind is very strong, and it's very difficult to encourage Ajahn Brahm to anything. Do monks do physical exercise? Yes. Sometimes I go for walks. Sometimes I go for fast walks just to get some exercise. I did some exercise with Freddie before on the first day. Yeah, that was quite good exercise. It was really steep up and steep down. It was really, really good actually. So that was great. So yes, and I don't know. I feel better if my body is in reasonably good shape. It doesn't have to be in super duper good shape, but not at least not falling apart completely. But even Ajahn Brahm actually does a little bit of exercise. He told me, and he was very proud of himself. He said he was walked from the monastery to Jhana Grove in the morning, to give the teaching over there. And he was very happy with himself when he said that. He thought, yes, I'm kind of walking to Jhana Grove. Usually he doesn't. Usually he walks a little bit on his walking path, and that's it. And he, because I've been trying to encourage him a lot, right? And the more I encourage, the more resistant he becomes. So I stopped encouraging, and suddenly now he's walking to Jhana Grove. Okay, that's good. Sometimes you have to use reverse psychology with Ajahn Brahm. Push-ups? That push-up, yeah, exactly. That's the only push-ups I think he would do. Yeah. Yoga, some of the monks do yoga. I don't do yoga myself, but some of the monks do. And so, yes. One of the monks, his exercise was hanging upside down. So he had this, on his walking path, he had this kind of rope and this kind of metal bar, and it kind of would hang by his feet on this thing. And he's an old monk, yeah? He's like 80 years old. He used to live in Taiwan. He was a English teacher in Taiwan for 40 years. So it's kind of, when I talk to him, he calls himself, he says he's Chinese. That's what he says. He's actually American, but he says he's Chinese because he lived for so long in Taiwan. And he's this really, really eccentric old man, yeah, and hangs upside down on his walking path. And one day, it broke, right? And that's really bad because you're hanging upside down, and he fell, and so he almost broke his neck, yeah, because he fell from this thing, yeah. So this is the kind of exercise that monks do, but maybe they shouldn't be doing that kind of exercise. I'm not sure. You know this monk, Della? Yeah, you know this. Okay, Upasamo. Yeah, yeah, right. So he's our local Taiwanese monk in Bodhinana Monastery. Yeah. Okay. Next one. What are the top 3 priorities, in your opinion, to be good at meditation? Top 3. Okay. Number 1, right view. Yeah, number 1 priority. Because right view underlies everything in Buddhism. So if you want to be kind, right view is the basis for kindness. And it's very hard to be truly, fully kind at all times. And to always be moral is very difficult. You know what it's like. Sometimes the situation conspire against you, and you just want to say something bad, or you at least thinking bad thoughts, yeah? It's very hard to have a pure mind at all times. Very difficult. And the only way you can really do that is because you have incredible motivation to do so. That incredible motivation comes from right view. That's why right view leads to right intention. The motivation, the motivating force is right view. So really understand how important this is. Really understand why the spiritual path is all that matters, and why the world is completely irrelevant. When I say the world is irrelevant, I don't mean that you shouldn't have an ordinary life. I don't mean you shouldn't look after your family. I don't mean you shouldn't work. I don't mean you shouldn't even start a beauty parlor. That's okay, yeah? You have to have some kind, you have to have these things in your life. But it is how you have these things that it matters. So you turn your worldly life into a spiritual path. You turn your family life into a spiritual path. You turn your work, everything you do becomes part of your spiritual path. And it lifts up your ordinary life and makes it so much more pleasant when you make that part of your spiritual practice. All of this comes from right view because you understand how incredibly important it is. You cannot waste the opportunity to do what is right, to do what is good. Top 1 priority, right view. From that right view comes number 2 priority, which is to be kind. And when I say kind, I mean morality. And I mean morality in the deepest sense of the word. The actions by body and speech, and also by mind. Yeah? Avoiding the bad, doing the good. Yes, there's like 6 areas, body, speech, and mind, and then good and bad on all of those 3. So 6 areas. That I combine all of that into one thing, kindness. And then you can also put generosity in there as well. That becomes 7, everything combined in kindness. So right view and then kindness. Yeah, these are the 2 things you really want to develop. And as you do that, then the rest, the path, meditation, will happen as a consequence. Priority number 3, well, right view comes from reading the suttas, comes from listening to good Dhamma talks, listen to Dhamma talks that align with the suttas. That's where right view comes from. So come back to these teachings. Yeah, come back to listen to these things. Do a meditation retreat occasionally. That's number 3 priority. Do a meditation retreat once or twice a year. Yeah, 3 days, 4 days here is nice. Sometimes it's difficult to make it more because it's so hard to make it work, but sometimes make it a bit longer. Come down to Perth. We have one of the best meditation centers in the world right there in Perth. Very beautiful meditation center. In the bush, far away, quiet. I'm not sure if it is quite as quiet as here. Here is even more quiet, I think. It's extraordinary. Except for those people shooting down the bottom. That's the only kind of noise we have here. But apart from that, it's really quiet. And even at Jhana Grove, sometimes you have that kind of cars going by. But actually, it's pretty good, I have to say. Jhana Grove is pretty good. So you go there, nice atmosphere. Ajahn Brahm comes walking in, gives a nice teaching. Yeah, there's a lot of land there, a lot of bush. You can walk around and enjoy yourself. Really good company. Yeah, when you go to Jhana Grove. So it's a really good place to go. So that is recommended. I would recommend you to go on a organized retreat. Some people go on self-retreat at Jhana Grove, which it can be nice, but it loses some of the atmosphere, the vibe when you are by yourself. When you're in a group, everyone is practicing. You have a good teacher to set the tone and all these things for the retreat. It can be very helpful. When you're by yourself, you're left to your own devices. That is much more challenging unless you are already a super-duper meditator. Yeah, so that is, again, you can try both because it's worthwhile testing yourself out a little bit. So you can try both in that way. So those would be my top 3 priorities. Yeah. Okay. Should you meditate a little bit every day? Yes, if you can, try to meditate a little bit every day. Does not have to be long. Yeah. One of those things about daily meditation is that often difficult to meditate long. But if you can do it 20 minutes, that's good. Even 15 minutes is enough to make you a little bit peaceful. It is just enough to give you a little bit of support in your daily life. If you can't, then that's also okay. The most important things are the things I was just talking about. Okay. Dear Ajahn, thank you for your insightful teachings over the past few days. Some of us won't be here tomorrow. I would appreciate your guidance on the last question. Is practicing mindfulness the most effective way to overcome obsession with distracting thoughts? Mindfulness is helpful because mindfulness makes you aware that you have distracting thoughts. When you don't have any mindfulness, sometimes you're not even aware of the thoughts. They just take over your mind completely and you have no idea what's going on. So it is the beginning, yeah? But it's only the beginning. To really overcome distracting thoughts, you have to understand why they are there. Mindfulness is not enough because mindfulness without wisdom doesn't really help you to overcome the problem. So you are mindful, and then you have this idea called clear comprehension, which reminds you of what is important, reminds you how to overcome these things. So what you need to do is you have to be aware that, yes, this is my problem. Then you have to know what kind of thoughts you have. And it's kind of obvious. Okay, so the kind of thoughts we have normally, distractions about things in our life that we need to think about, problems we need to resolve. That's kind of one typical thought. Another one, you're upset with somebody, you think about the past. Yeah. 2 kind of thought. The third one is just fantasizing. Yeah, you're all over the place thinking about all kind of fantasies, I don't know what kind of all kind of people think all kinds of fantasies. And so in all of these cases, if now you know roughly what you have to do, right? If you are upset with somebody, you have to forgive. This is this idea that people are just programmed robots anyway. They cannot really be any different from what they are. They are forced by their past conditioning to do stupid things. The only rational thing is to forgive them. This is the way they are. They are trapped by that. They are the ones who have the problem. Don't make it yours. So this is how you overcome ill will. Yeah, and it's not that hard to do. If you keep on with this kind of thinking, this kind of mindset, it will not be long before it's actually getting difficult to get upset with people. They are just a robot. Yeah, you have compassion for them because they have to live with that stupidity of theirs. They have to live with that terrible mind that does stupid things. Wow. Listen, let's go and have a cup of coffee. I'll give you a cup of coffee because you feel compassion for them. Yeah. If they don't like coffee, you buy them something else. But this is kind of the idea. You have that compassion. And then there is all the distracting thoughts about the daily activities, and that is about the priorities that we have. This is the right view of priorities, remembering what really matters. Make that very clear in your mind, what is important. Understand what is your long-term benefit. Invest for the long term, not the short term. Have a multi-life approach to your investment strategy. Yeah, I always like the idea of the Buddha as an investment strategist. Yeah, the Buddha has a really long-term investment strategy. Yeah, when the bank tells you that you have to invest for the long term, invest for 20 years. That's short term in Buddhism. Yeah, 20 years is nothing. 20 lifetimes. Okay, now we're talking. Yeah. But the bank will never tell you to invest for 20 lifetimes because the bank will go bankrupt if they do that. So the bank is self-interested. The bank should really tell you the right view. Invest for 20 lifetimes, yeah? Don't bank with us, bank with the Buddha. That's what the bank should say. Doesn't say that. So, so come to bank with the Buddha. Yeah, that's the right place to bank. Invest for the long term. An investment for the long term means that you think about what really matters in this world. Invest in kindness, invest in compassion, invest in all of these qualities of the heart that you bring with you into the future. That is the right way of thinking. So this is how you overcome distracting thoughts. And of course, all the fantasizing that goes on, well, depending on what it is, usually it is related to similar idea of just wasting time with all kind of things. Again, you just have to remind yourself what really matters, similar kind of thing. So this is how you overcome distracting thoughts. Mindfulness is not enough. Mindfulness is just one part of this. Okay. So, next one. Dear Ajahn, how to deal with grief and regrets, especially someone suffered because of your action. Because of my action? No, I'm just being naughty. I know what you mean, so I'm just being naughty. Thank you. It's terrible if you kind of sit here and you talk to people and they're actually all suffering while you talk. Imagine. That's really bad if you're the teacher and everyone is suffering because of you. But so hopefully not. Anyway, no, I know exactly what you mean. You feel that someone suffered because you did something, and then someone suffered because of that. So the first thing is that if you did something wrong, that was clearly wrong, then that is one side of the coin. But sometimes people suffer even if we haven't done anything wrong because they misunderstand or whatever. So let's deal with that first. What if someone suffers even if you haven't done anything wrong? Well, in that case, you just have to, there's no reason for you to have regret because you haven't done anything wrong. Our job is not to please the whole world. That's impossible. Sometimes people will misunderstand us and we just have to shrug our shoulders. Or maybe we can go to them and say, well, I didn't mean it that way. I was trying to do the right thing and this is what happened. I'm really sorry that happened in this way. But please don't have regrets or feel bad about things that you did when actually your intention was good and they were the ones who misunderstood. This is number one. If you really have made a mistake and you have regrets because of that, remember that you too are like a program, like a robot. You too are programmed by the past. Of course you're going to make mistakes. Of course you're going to hurt other people sometimes. That is to be expected. And you should have enough compassion for yourself, enough forgiveness for yourself to understand that you are not going to be perfect. You're going to make these mistakes. And then you can forgive yourself because you know that you too are trapped by that conditioning, trapped by your habits, trapped by your personality, trapped by your past. This is a trap. The person you are right now is a trap. The personality you have is formed through the past, and now you are caught in that personality, and that personality will sometimes make mistakes, and that's where those mistakes come from. So have compassion for yourself as well. Know that making mistakes is unavoidable. I have made many mistakes in my life, and I have learned, at least to a large extent, to forgive myself for that stupidity in the past, because I know that actually when I think back, I sort of realize I couldn't really have made any other choices. It's kind of weird. The more distance you get from your actions in the past, the more it seems like it was almost inevitable. So when I became a monk, should I be proud of that? Not really. It just happened. It happened to me. Somehow, at the time, it felt like I was making these choices. But when I look from a distance, actually, it is more like I was bound to become a monk. That's what it looks like now. And in the same way, you are bound to make these mistakes, bound to do stupid things, because the conditioning is so strong. And the problem is the feeling inside that we have a choice. That is the real problem, because that feeling that we have a choice, that is the sense of self that gets in the way. The sense of self is what tells you that you have the ability to make different choices. And that sense of self, of course, is not really real. This is one of the fundamental teachings of the Buddha. And so if you feel that you could have made a difference, actually that is false. You probably had to do those things at that particular time. That's kind of scary, right? It means that all our actions are pretty much, to a large extent, they are determined. The way to avoid being determined is that in every moment when you are about to do something, you stop and you ask yourself, you bring the Dhamma into the question, and you ask yourself, is this in accordance with the Dhamma or not? So in every moment, we have the possibility of changing the way we act by reflecting, by being mindful and asking ourselves, is this conditioned by the Dhamma, or is it just conditioned by our past and by our silliness? And then you can come out of that conditioning. But if you just are on automatic all the time, on autopilot, and the Dhamma doesn't really do its work, well, then you're going to carry on hurting yourself and others into the future. So have a lot of compassion for yourself, and it's okay to make mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. And sometimes it feels like we are the only ones who've made a mistake because people don't often talk about their mistakes. But guaranteed, everyone has made similar kind of mistakes. Yeah? And that's why I am never really surprised when people come and tell me, I've done this, You never really need to be embarrassed. Sometimes I have told Ajahn Brahm about the mistakes I have done, and I felt really embarrassed. But Ajahn Brahm just shrugged his shoulders. Of course you did that. Yeah, it's like, whatever. Yeah, carry on. Yeah, that's what he does. And it's beautiful. I'm never afraid. If I murdered somebody, I wouldn't be afraid of telling Ajahn Brahm. Yeah. Ajahn Brahm said, oh, you murdered somebody? Yeah, that happens all the time. Don't worry about it. Ajahn Brahm is a little bit like that, right? And that's beautiful because it means you can be relaxed. You can be okay. He will always forgive you. He will never say anything bad about you. He knows what human beings are like. And it's really a wonderful thing to have a teacher like that. So then I try my very best to live a little bit up to Ajahn Brahm's way of being, because it's so liberating to have that kind of teacher. So, okay, there you are. So let us move on now. Wow, there's still a few questions left. I've got to hurry up a little bit. Okay, dear Ajahn, have you or do you accept any disciples or followers? What qualities should one possess in order to be your disciple? Oh, that is really hard, yeah? The very high bar to be my disciple. I don't take anyone as my disciple. No, I think the idea of personal disciples is a very bad idea. So, in our monastery, no one takes on board personal disciples. I guess I'm a disciple of Ajahn Brahm, but Ajahn Brahm doesn't really think in terms of personal disciples either. So be a disciple of the Buddha. Be a disciple of the Aryan Sangha. Be a disciple of, find inspiration in people. I'm very happy to be of assistance if I can. You're allowed to ask me questions, but don't think of you as my disciple. It's always dangerous to be too close to someone. So find inspiration where you can, and that is the right way of thinking about this. And then you will be okay. I get this question quite a lot actually, and it is, I have come to understand the dangers of this kind of close relationship between a teacher and a person. It is not really a good way of doing things. So the Buddha should be your main teacher, and then anyone else who can inspire you can be that. So, yeah. Okay. So, this one says, Chinese people think that the Buddha doll, have souls living inside. Okay, so the Buddha statue, or the Buddha, like the Milöfo Buddha, has a soul inside. Is that the one? Hearing that you won't worship the dolls of bodhisattvas and Buddhas, do you think that the Buddha behind you has no meaning? In addition, Chinese people think that when Ajahn having a Buddhist class, there will be many ghosts at the door or flying in the sky. Do you often see ghosts in the class or after class? Will you talk with them? Okay, I've never got this question before. This is interesting. So, does the Buddha statue here have a meaning? Yes, it has a lot of meaning. And the main meaning is that it represents the Buddha. It represents the qualities of the Buddha. That's the meaning for me. So when you, in the early days, soon after the Buddha passed away, there wasn't any Buddha statues. This happened only a few centuries later on. In the early days, they just had the memory of the Buddha, they had the Dhamma, the teachings, but there was no real reminder of the Buddha. The earliest things that reminded them of the Buddha was things like the Bodhi tree. Yeah, that was an early representation of the Buddha. Another one was the empty seat. Yeah, it's interesting. The empty seat was a reminder of the Buddha. The footprint is another one. Yeah, this goes back all the way to the suttas. There was someone who had a footprint with a Dhammacakka in it, according to one of the suttas. It's kind of strange. So these are the early reminders of the Buddha. And the Buddha statue arose much, much later, maybe a few hundred years later. And so we need to use these ideas in a nice way. Does it have a soul inside of it? No, because a soul, there's no such thing in Buddhism as a soul anyway. But so it is there to represent something. So when you bow down to a Buddha statue, remember what it represents. And when you bow down to those qualities, as I mentioned before, you are growing those qualities within you because you are showing respect to those qualities. And that is the power of bowing down to a Buddha statue. It can be very, very powerful and very useful if you use it in the right way. So we make all of these little rituals, we make them useful in this way. So you can, bodhisattvas, if you want to bow down to bodhisattvas, please do so, because bodhisattvas can also, these are good beings, right? So bow down to them if you wish, and build up those good qualities. Are there many ghosts outside? I don't think so. I think the ghosts, more like maybe some devas outside. Yeah, that's what I'm kind of hoping, rather than the ghosts. Usually ghosts, they are a little bit afraid of the Dhamma. Usually when the ghosts see monks, usually they go a long way away, and you are pretty safe. So one of the things we do as monks, we do ghost busting. Yeah, are you aware of that? We have ghost busting. So sometimes we have people who have strange experiences, like people in their homes or whatever, or in a restaurant, and they have like strange things happening, and then they will invite the monks, to do some chanting. And whenever we do the chanting, usually the ghosts will leave when we do that. So ghosts are more like ghosts. We get rid of ghosts. We don't attract them. We get rid of the ghosts. That's kind of the idea of monks. So you can relax when you are around the monks. No ghosts around. That's the good news. But if you ever do see a ghost, then the right attitude to have to a ghost is to have metta, to wish them well. Yeah, because these are suffering beings. All beings suffer, including the ghosts. So have metta towards them. May you be well, ghost. And then usually they will leave you alone, and they will be happy because you have supported them. All right. How many hours of sleep do you get every day? Is there a typical day, and what is it like? How many hours? It just depends. It depends on how much meditation you do. If you do a lot of meditation, you don't need to sleep very much. If you do a lot of work, you don't meditate, you need to sleep more. So I guess after coming back to Perth, the first night after Hong Kong, I probably sleep a lot. And then after a few days, maybe sleep less again. So it just depends. And it's interesting, because while I've been here, I've also done a lot of other work as well in between. So I haven't slept that much, actually. But so it's kind of for me, it has been quite active. But I have enjoyed it, because you teach, and teaching the Dhamma is inspiring. You do a bit of meditation, and then still have excess energy to do other work as well. So that has been good. Sometimes it is things that you have to do. You have no choice, and you just have to do it. And so that's kind of how it works. So it is very variable. I don't know, sleep varies from, maybe 5, 6, 7 hours, depending on the situation. So depending on how much meditation you do. I'm not one of those monks. Some occasionally, you hear about people who need very little sleep, like 4 hours. I think Ajahn Brahm sometimes sleeps only 4 hours, especially when he meditates a lot. And that's kind of really nice. But the important point is to sleep what is natural. That is the important point. And don't underestimate your need for sleep, because if you underestimate it, it's going to be counterproductive. So make sure you sleep enough. I think that's really important. All right. Actually, I didn't answer the second part of the question. What is a typical day like? Typical day is that I don't think there is a typical day. Yeah, it's kind of, it varies a lot. Sometimes we do physical work, sometimes we do teaching, sometimes we meditate more. So so it's very hard to kind of give a typical day actually. Okay. Do you ever wear shoes since you become monk? Yes, I wear shoes. I have shoes up here. I just don't wear them walking between here. That's all. Yeah. So yeah. What has been the toughest part about being a monk? Okay, toughest part about being a monk. Okay, so this, I don't know. It's hard to say what the toughest part is. I think the toughest part is when the meditation isn't going very well, yeah? Because monastic life depends on meditation. So if you have a good meditation, then your monastic life is happy, because then you have a source of happiness. But if you haven't got meditation, then monastic life, we haven't got any other sources of happiness so much. In lay life, you kind of indulge in various things, and you can't really indulge so much in those things. And so it is important as a monk that you always keep your meditation going reasonably well. Otherwise, you have a problem. It makes it very difficult. Then it's very easy for the mind to go astray. It goes into all kind of areas where it shouldn't go, into all kind of sensuality. That is always problematic if you are a monastic. So make sure your meditation is going well, then you are okay. And those times when it's not going well, that's usually the most difficult times as a monastic. And like everyone, the mind is always uncertain. Sometimes the mind is not so happy, and then it goes well again. It's kind of this kind of like this. Actually, it's not like this. It's more like this. Up and down, but a tendency to go up. Going up like this, gradually. That's kind of how it works. All right. What is the most efficient way for a layperson to reduce the chance of being reborn, given a layperson's life has limited time to study the sutras and to meditate, please? So the most effective way is to practice the path to the best of your ability. Practice the Noble Eightfold Path, do all the right things, maximize it, come to a good understanding of the Buddhist teachings, so that in your next life, the chances of not being reborn at all is actually very small. So you probably, you should do those things that lead to a suitable rebirth and also maximize the chances of not being reborn at the same time. Unfortunately, those are the same thing. So you want to understand the Buddha's teachings as much as possible, so that if you are reborn, when you come across the word of the Buddha, you recognize it. You think, wow, I didn't recognize this. How come this is weird? I recognize these teachings. There is a sutta about this, where you get reborn in heaven, and then the Devas start teaching you the Dhamma. And you think, wait a minute, I remember this. And then all the Dhamma comes back to you. But if you are going to remember the Dhamma, it has to be the word of the Buddha, not the word of some monk or nun or someone else, because the word of the Buddha is what everyone has in common. If you go to the Devas, they're not going to recite Ajahn Brahm's teachings, or anyone else. They're going to recite the word of the Buddha. That's what they know. And so you should try to understand the Dhamma, then you will recognize it. And then at the same time, you should practice the path as far as you possibly can, creating as much of a strong foundation as you possibly can. Then you are maximizing the opportunities both for ending rebirth and also to carry on in the future life. So this is the best situation to be in. Okay. Dear Ajahn, as a beginner, is there any behavior and book that I should recommend to increase, that you would recommend to increase or improve our mindfulness? Do you think we should start both mindfulness and kindfulness from ourselves. Thank you very much. Yes, kindfulness is better than mindfulness, because kindfulness means mindfulness plus kindness coming together. Yeah, so this is the kind of the idea in Buddhism. So I think Ajahn Brahm's little books are great. I think things like Opening the Door of Your Heart is a great little book to read. Very simple, nice stories, but they are very meaningful. When you listen to Ajahn Brahm, you have to make sure that you don't just laugh, but that you also reflect on the message. It's easy with Ajahn Brahm just to take away the joke and to forget that actually there is a message there as well. So think about the message as well. And so, and this is one of those beautiful coinages of Ajahn Brahm, the idea of kindfulness. Yeah, the idea be kind and be mindful. So so read those books. They are very simple and very easy. And then if you want to read suttas, you can do that as well. Start with some of the inspiring things. Start with the Dhammapada. Read a few verses every now and again. Read a sutta. Listen to sutta talks by someone who understands the sutta as well, and see if you can understand what is going on. I don't know if you have enjoyed this retreat. Then it's wonderful. Yeah, if you have enjoyed it, because this is a lot of the things I've been talking about are actually quite hard to deal with. It's actually quite profound. It's not just kind of superficial Dhamma, the idea of impermanence and all these kind of things. It's actually quite, these are real Dhamma teachings, not some kind of, so if you can deal with this, then it means that you're pretty much ready for the Dhamma, which is kind of wonderful. So try some of those things and see what happens. Okay, last question for this evening. Dear Ajahn, can you tell us what a typical day is for a monk like you? Is there a typical day? That's right. There is no typical day really. But the typical day begins with meditation, and then after that, it is uncertain what happens next. Maybe you have some breakfast, maybe not. Maybe you do some physical work, maybe not. Maybe I do some translation work, maybe not. Have lunch, usually have lunch. Lunch is one of those things, So you meditation, lunch, and then after lunch, again, very uncertain, very unreliable. Maybe I go to Hong Kong, maybe not. Uncertain. So we don't know what's going to happen, basically. So there you are. That is all for this evening. So let's pay respect to the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha before we call it a night, and then we will carry on tomorrow morning as usual. Arahang Sama Sambuddho Bhagava Buddhang Bhagavantang Abhivademi Svakato Bhagavata Dhammo Dhammang Namasami Supatipanno Bhagavato Savaka Sangho Sanghang Namami